I'm Jamie Floyd, and welcome to TED Talks in NYC, the series that brings TED.com's celebrated conversations to television and keeps the conversation going with some of the brightest minds in New York City. This week, Women on Top. Why are there still so few women leaders in business? And will the glass ceiling ever thoroughly be shattered? We'll get some perspective from two of New York's top female executives. But first, let's listen to a 2010 TED Women Talk from Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg as she offers some sound advice to women in the workforce.
So for any of us in this room today, let's start out by admitting we're lucky. We don't live in the world our mothers lived in, our grandmothers lived in, where career choices for women were so limited. And if you're in this room today, most of us grew up in a world where we have basic civil rights. And amazingly, we still live in a world where some women don't have them. But all that aside, we still have a problem, and it's a real problem. And the problem is this: women are not making it to the top of any profession anywhere in the world. The numbers tell the story quite clearly. 190 heads of state, 9 are women. Of all the people in parliament in the world, 13% are women. In the corporate sector, women at the top, C-level jobs, board seats, tops out at 16%. The numbers have not moved since 2002 and are going in the wrong direction. And even in the nonprofit world, a world we sometimes think of as being led by more women, women at the top, 20%. We also have another problem, which is that women face harder choices between professional success and personal fulfillment. A recent study in the US showed that of senior managers, of married senior managers, 2/3 of the married men had children, and only 1/3 of the married women had children. A couple of years ago, I was in New York, and I was pitching a deal, and I was in one of those fancy New York private equity offices you can picture. And I'm in the meeting, it's about a 3-hour meeting, and 2 hours in, there's kind of needs to be that bio break, and everyone stands up. And the partner running the meeting starts looking really embarrassed. And I realize he doesn't know where the women's room is in his office. So I start looking around for moving boxes, figuring they just moved in, but I don't see any. And so I said, "So did you just move into this office?" And he said, "No, we've been here about a year." And I said, "Are you telling me that I'm the only woman to have pitched a deal in this office in a year?" And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, or maybe you're the only one who had to go to the bathroom." So the question is, how are we going to fix this? How do we change these numbers at the top? How do we make this different? I want to start out by saying I talk about this, about keeping women in the workforce, because I really think that's the answer. In the high-income part of our workforce, in the people who end up at the top Fortune 500 CEO jobs or the equivalent in other industries, the problem, I am convinced, is that women are dropping out. Now, people talk about this a lot, and they talk about things like flex time and mentoring and programs companies should have to train women. I want to talk about none of that today, even though that's all really important. Today, I want to focus on what we can do as individuals. What are the messages we need to tell ourselves? What are the messages we tell the women that work with and for us? What are the messages we tell our daughters? Now, at the outset, I want to be very clear that this speech comes with no judgments. I don't have the right answer. I don't even have it for myself. I left San Francisco, where I live, on Monday, and I was getting on the plane for this conference, and my daughter, who's 3, when I dropped her off at preschool, did that whole hugging the leg, crying, "Mom, you don't get on the plane" thing. This is hard. I feel guilty sometimes. I know no women, whether they're at home or whether they're in the workforce, that don't feel that sometimes. So I'm not saying that staying in the workforce is the right thing for everyone. My talk today is about what the messages are if you do want to stay in the workforce. And I think there are 3. 1, sit at the table. 2, make your partner a real partner. And 3, look at that, don't leave before you leave. Number 1, sit at the table. Just a couple weeks ago at Facebook, we hosted a very senior government official, and he came in to meet with senior execs from around Silicon Valley. And everyone kind of sat at the table, and then he had these 2 women who were traveling with him who were pretty senior in his department, and I kind of said to them, sit at the table, come on, sit at the table. And they sat on the side of the room. When I was in college, my senior year, I took a course called European Intellectual History. Don't you love that kind of thing from college? Wish I could do that now. And I took it with my roommate, Carrie, who was then a brilliant literary student and went on to be a brilliant literary scholar. And my brother, smart guy, but a water polo playing pre-med who was a sophomore. The 3 of us take this class together. And then Carrie reads all the books in the original Greek and Latin, goes to all the lectures. I read all the books in English and go to most of the lectures. My brother is kind of busy. He reads 1 book of 12 and goes to a couple of lectures, marches himself up to our room a couple days before the exam to get himself tutored. The 3 of us go to the exam together, and we sit down, and we study, sit there for 3 hours in our little blue notebooks. Yes, I'm that old. And we walk out, and we look at each other, and we say, how'd you do? And Carrie says, boy, I feel like I didn't really draw out the main point on the Hegelian dialectic. And I say, God, I really wish I had really connected John Locke's theory of property, the philosophers that follow. And my brother says, I got the top grade in the class. You got the top grade in the class? You don't know anything. The problem with these stories is that they show what the data shows. Women systematically underestimate their own abilities. If you test men and women and you ask them questions on totally objective criteria like GPAs, men get it wrong slightly high and women get it wrong slightly low. Women do not negotiate for themselves in the workforce. A study in the last 2 years of people entering the workforce out of college showed that 57% of boys entering, or men, I guess, are negotiating their first salary, and only 7% of women. And most importantly, men attribute their success to themselves and women attribute it to other external factors. If you ask men why they did a good job, they'll say, I'm awesome. If you ask, obviously, why are you even asking? If you ask women why they did a good job, what they'll say is someone helped them, they got lucky, they worked really hard. Why does this matter? Boy, it matters a lot, because no one gets to the corner office by sitting on the side, not at the table. And no one gets the promotion if they don't think they deserve their success or they don't even understand their own success. I wish the answer were easy. I wish I could just go tell all the young women I work for, all these fabulous women, believe in yourself, negotiate for yourself, own your own success. I wish I could tell that to my daughter. But it's not that simple, because what the data shows above all else is one thing, which is that success and likability are positively correlated for men and negatively correlated for women. And everyone's nodding, because we all know this to be true. There's a really good study that shows this really well. There's a famous Harvard Business School study on a woman named Heidi Roizen, and she's an operator in a in a company in Silicon Valley, and she uses her contacts to become a very successful venture capitalist. In 2002, not so long ago, a professor who was then at Columbia University took that case and made it Heidi Roizen. And he gave that case out, both of them, to 2 groups of students. He changed exactly 1 word, Heidi to Howard, but that 1 word made a really big difference. He then surveyed the students, and the good news was the students, both men and women, thought Heidi and Howard were equally competent, and that's good. The bad news was that everyone liked Howard. He's a great guy. You want to work for him. You want to spend the day fishing with him. But Heidi, not so sure. She's a little out for herself. She's a little political. You're not sure you'd want to work for her. This is the complication. We have to tell our daughter and our colleagues, we have to tell ourselves to believe we got the A, to reach for the promotion, to sit at the table. And we have to do it in a world where for them there are sacrifices they will make for that, even though for their brothers there will not. The saddest thing about all of this is that it's really hard to remember this, and I'm about to tell a story which is truly embarrassing for me, but I think important. I gave this talk at Facebook not so long ago, to about 100 employees. And a couple hours later, there was a young woman who works there, sitting kind of outside my little desk, and she wanted to talk to me. And I said, okay, and she sat down and we talked, and she said, I learned something today. I learned that I need to keep my hand up. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you're giving this talk, and then you said you're gonna take 2 more questions, and I had my hand up with lots of other people, and then you took 2 more questions, and I put my hand down, and I noticed all the women put their hand down, and then you took more questions, only from the men. And I thought to myself, wow, if it's me, who cares about this obviously, giving this talk, during this talk, I can't even notice that the men's hands are still raised and the women's hands are still raised. How good are we as managers of our companies and our organizations at seeing that the men are reaching for opportunities more than women? We've got to get women to sit at the table. Message number 2, make your partner a real partner. I've become convinced that we've made more progress in the workforce than we have in the home. The data shows this very clearly. If a woman and a man work full-time and have a child, the woman does twice the amount of housework the man does, and the woman does 3 times the amount of childcare the man does. So she's got 3 jobs or 2 jobs, and he's got 1. Who do you think drops out when someone needs to be home more? The causes of this are really complicated, and I don't have time to go into them, and I don't think Sunday football watching and general laziness is the cause. I think the cause is more complicated. I think as a society, we put more pressure on our boys to succeed than we do on our girls. I know men that stay home and work in the home to support wives with careers, and it's hard. When I go to the mommy and me stuff and I see the father there, I notice that the other mommies don't play with him. And that's a problem, because we have to make it as important a job, because it's the hardest job in the world, to work inside the home for people of both genders, if we're going to even things out and let women stay in the workforce. Studies show that households with equal earning and equal responsibility also have half the divorce rate. And if that wasn't good enough motivation for everyone out there, they also have more, how shall I say this on this stage? They know each other more in the biblical sense as well. Message number 3, don't leave before you leave. I think there's a really deep irony to the fact that actions women are taking, and I see this all the time, with the objective of staying in the workforce actually lead to their eventually leaving. Here's what happens. We're all busy, everyone's busy, a woman's busy, and she starts thinking about having a child. And from the moment she starts thinking about having a child, she starts thinking about making room for that child. How am I going to fit this into everything else I'm doing? And literally from that moment, she doesn't raise her hand anymore. She doesn't look for a promotion. She doesn't take on the new project. She doesn't say, me, I want to do that. She starts leaning back. The problem is that, let's say she got pregnant that day, 9 months of pregnancy, 3 months of maternity leave, 6 months to catch her breath. Fast forward 2 years, more often, and as I've seen it, women start thinking about this way earlier. When they get engaged, when they get married, when they start thinking about trying to have a child, which can take a long time. One woman came to see me about this, and I kind of looked at her, she looked a little young, and I said, so are you and your husband thinking about having a baby? And she said, oh no, I'm not married. She didn't even have a boyfriend. I said, you're thinking about this just way too early. But the point is that what happens once you start kind of quietly leaning back? Everyone who's been through this, and I'm here to tell you, once you have a child at home, your job better be really good to go back, because it's hard to leave that kid at home. Your job needs to be challenging. It needs to be rewarding. You need to feel like you're making a difference. And if 2 years ago, you didn't take a promotion and some guy next to you did, if 3 years ago you stopped looking for new opportunities, you're going to be bored because you should have kept your foot on the gas pedal. Don't leave before you leave. Stay in. Keep your foot on the gas pedal until the very day you need to leave to take a break for a child, and then make your decisions. Don't make decisions too far in advance, particularly ones you're not even conscious you're making. My generation, really sadly, is not going to change the numbers at the top. They're just not moving. We are not going to get to, we're 50% of the population. In my generation, there will not be 50% of people at the top of any industry. But I'm hopeful that future generations can. I think a world that was run where half of our countries and half of our companies were run by women would be a better world. And it's not just because people would know where the women's bathrooms are, even though that would be very helpful. I think it would be a better world. I have 2 children. I have a 5-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. I want my son to have a choice to contribute fully in the workforce or at home. And I want my daughter to have the choice to not just succeed, but to be liked for her accomplishments. Thank you.
That's the opinion of one Silicon Valley exec. Now let's get some context from 2 New Yorkers at the top of their fields. Geraldine Laybourne, former chairman and CEO of Oxygen Media, and Joanna Coles, editor-in-chief of Marie Claire magazine. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great so, Geraldine, let me start with you. Why do you think there are so few women leaders in business and in all sectors of American life?
Well, I've been around for a long time. So I've been in business since the 70s, and I see tons of progress, never enough, but I do see women in very important roles. And I think the key question for me is, why do we want women in these roles? It's not because we have an equitable democracy where all people are created equal. It's not about that. It's about the fact that women bring different kinds of brains to work. They have 12% more prefrontal cortex, and they know how to solve problems in a very different way. So it's imperative for this country that is having real issues in business to be better at tapping a different brain structure. You know, I'm all for men and women working together. These 2 different brains come together and really solve problems in a dynamic way.
And I know you take issue with one phrase I used, the glass ceiling. Why?
Well, I take issue with the media, of course. I came through the media. I have to be a contrarian. But the media always finds something to kind of keep women in their container. So the glass ceiling was invented in the 80s, and whoever invented it was no friend of women. You know, to have a physical manifestation of what was going to be hard for us to break through didn't help anybody. Then we had the mommy track in the 90s, and now we have this obligation to live a perfectly balanced life. You know, I have led a perfectly joyous life of imbalance, and the only career that really needs balance is a yoga instructor.
But I think it's a particularly American concept of living a perfect life. And I always think the balance is frankly catching it before it hits the floor. But I agree with Jerry, and if I had been working since the 70s, I hope I look half as good as you do. I mean, it's very impressive. I already look far more haggard. But I think that the dialogue around working women and the sort of juggling dialogue is sort of puts women off. And one of the frustrations I have, and I didn't realize until I actually became the boss at Marie Claire, the editor-in-chief at Marie Claire, is actually it's much easier to be the boss than it is to be caught in middle management. I think the worst place in America is to be stuck with 2 or 3 kids, young kids, in middle management, because you have no control over your schedule. You're still anxious that you're trying to make it to the top, and it's truly a very difficult place to be stuck, because you're listening to your boss, you're trying to please your boss, and you're trying to keep the people below you from sort of reaching where you are, so that there's even more competition. And I don't mean trying to stop them, but I mean you're caught in that very difficult, awkward place. And one of the things I think is incredibly incumbent on women in senior positions is to remind junior women you get paid more, you get more support, and corporate America takes you more seriously the higher up the ladder you go.
The most exciting thing to me about Cheryl's talk is she was talking very personally, personal anecdotes, and it was really about what can you do as a person. And for me, I was lucky enough to have a mentor who, you know, came to my speeches and gave me notes and hemmed my pants. And,
a woman?
Yes. And so I decided that would be part of what I did, but it was a very personal decision. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to help bring other women up through the cable television world. And she set the tone We're going to make this better for women. And when women hang together, it is awesome what they can do.
And you led the team that created Nickelodeon and Nick at Night. You served as president of Disney and ABC Cable Networks, co-founder of Oxygen, as we said at the beginning. So what is the key to your success? And is there something about being a woman? Are there inherent female traits that make us good leaders?
Well, again, I think we're fantastic strategic planners. I think we can take in, because of the way our brain is structured, we have lots of open topics. We want to know how the population's doing, how's education going, how's the company bottom line going. We have all these things in mind. What's interesting to me is Cheryl giving statistics. When I started in business, there were no statistics because there were no women.
It wasn't
And
even statistically
now
relevant.
they've done study after study, and there are always two things that women don't do as well or equally to men. One is tooting our own horn. So I say, if you can't toot your own horn, toot another woman's horn. And the other one is that we don't trust our intuition. We don't take risks fast enough. We want to dot every I and cross every T. 80% of all business decisions get based on intuition, but we get bogged down in analysis because we want to be such perfect little citizens. And it's just fascinating to me. So those are the two things that universally we don't do as well at.
Now, Joanna, I want to ask you the same question, but in a slightly different way. You've obviously had a long career here in the States. You're at Marie Claire now. You were at More, a magazine for women, but also at New York Magazine. But before that, as a journalist in the UK, a woman journalist in the UK, is there something about being in New York that empowers women that might be different if you were working as an executive in a different country or even a different part of the United States?
Well, I personally have found far more female mentors in New York than I ever had in England, although I've never actually specifically gone out searching for mentors. I feel like I've had great colleagues along the way, and you pick the people that you think are going to, that you sort of are impressed by, and that you feel like, gosh, I'd like to be able to do it a little bit like that. And I would say that a lot of them were men, and some of them were women, more women in New York. But one of the things I think is very interesting is the roles that working women have as they're portrayed in the popular media. You think of Sarah Jessica Parker's most recent film, I Don't Know How She Does It, based on a rather good book about women in the workplace. And I love Sarah Jessica Parker, but at the center of this film is a woman who we are led to believe is an investment banker constantly in New York from Boston, where she lives, yet she doesn't have enough money to hire a nanny. Well, A, that doesn't make sense. B, she has the partner that Sheryl Sandberg is talking about, but it's still not enough. She's constantly whining about it. She sets herself up in competition with the non-working mothers. And always, women's struggles are presented as A, struggles with other women, but B, you can never catch a break. I mean, one thinks of the Miranda Priestly character in The Devil Wears Prada. Yes. She might have had the big job, but then she had a miserable home life. You know, you can never see great images of women where you have both. And it's so reassuring to hear you say you had this joyous life.
And yet surely there must have been obstacles along the way because you were a woman.
You know, I did not face that many obstacles because I was a woman. And I was cognizant of the fact that I could not be a good man. I was not going to be a good man. When I started out in business, they had textbooks telling us how to dress and how to talk. Talk like a man, wear navy blue, that's a sincere color, and bow ties. And it was
none of us are wearing navy blue today.
No,
clearly none of us
and
are sincere.
I made a concrete choice early on. It's like, you know what? I am going to do a heck of a job if I be Jerry Laybourne. But if I try to be some guy, I am not going to succeed. And so then it was like, well, what do I bring to the table that's special? And I just brought it. And you know what? I have a sense of humor. You know, a sense of humor is a big help.
Hugely important, hugely important.
And you can say just about anything if you can be funny. Yeah. And, you know, I just was myself.
So if I could ask each of you the single best piece of advice you could give to young women entering the workforce, now that they know they can be happy and fulfilled and may not even hit that many obstacles if they know that they don't have to wear navy blue and act like a man, what's the single piece of advice you would give? Joanna, you first.
I would say work as hard as you can, because it's fun if you're in the right, assuming you're in the right job or you're going in the right direction. I would say work really hard, because I think that's incredibly important. And I would also say model yourself on people you feel are successful and have the kind of a life that you want.
And Jerry?
I think work hard and nothing is beneath you, you know. It's like, you know what, you can learn
So
from
true.
every single situation. And I take a plumber's approach to everything. I like to get in there, see how it all works, and then, you know, you can get up there and lead. But dig deep, try to clarify what you're really passionate about, and try to work in that area, because you're going to be working a really long time, and you might as well like it. But, you know, don't behave. Disruptive behavior and disruptive thinking is what has built some of the greatest brands in this world. Steve Jobs did not behave. And, you know, he created one of the strongest brands ever.
Fun question to spin right off of that. Who is the female leader you admire most and why?
Well, Eleanor Roosevelt. And today I think about her all the time. She had many, many famous sayings. One that I read recently was, there are two kinds, and I'm paraphrasing, there are two kinds of sins. Aggressive sins that are about violence and greed, and passive sins that are about apathy and laziness. And when you think about where we are as a nation, I feel like we are in a terrible trough of apathy. And I feel like she, you know, she knew that those were the sins that were going to sink us. And so when I think about why does this country need women, it's because women know how to think about bigger concerns. They know how to think about the community. They know how to change things. And we need to change some things.
Joanna, woman leader who inspires you and why?
Well, one anecdote that I always think is very powerful is when President Sirleaf Johnson in Liberia, who just got the Nobel Peace Prize, was appointed, one of the issues she was dealing with was that there was a lot of rape and sexual violence from UN soldiers against the very people that they were supposed to be protecting. And she said, well, why can't we have women soldiers? And overnight, when they put the women soldiers in, the situation changed. And it was just a very clear, new way of thinking. And I felt that was very impressive. So given that she's, I think, one of only 9 women leaders, you know, country leaders, presidents, she would actually have my vote right now. I think she's a deeply impressive woman.
I would vote for her too. I completely agree.
Thank you both. 2 very powerful answers and a wonderful conversation. Women leaders in business and in our country generally, we need more, and we've presented some very good reasons why, and I'm sure many people have been listening. Thank you for being with me today.
Our pleasure.
And that's our show. Join me next time for more compelling conversation on TED Talks in NYC. We leave you with some of our other TED Show panelists and the female leaders they most admire. Thanks for watching. I'm Jamie Floyd.
Oprah Winfrey.
Hillary Clinton.
My 7-year-old daughter. She's a modern woman, opinionated and bossy.
Michelle Obama.
My mom, Shirley Chisholm.
Majora Carter, environmentalist and green jobs activist.
All the female public high school teachers out there.
Angela Merkel, the German chancellor.
Queen Elizabeth I.
Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese leader, for her tenacity and strong will.
It's such an exciting time to be a woman.